Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if you agree that service to this country doesn't come with an expiration date, go ahead and like and subscribe, because what happened to the man you're about to meet should never happen to anyone who's ever worn the uniform. His name was Robert Keene, Bobby to those who knew him best, and on that quiet Tuesday morning, he wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't there to make a scene or flash medals or brag about battles long past. All he wanted was to withdraw a few $100s from an old account he hadn't touched in years, the same account he used decades ago to deposit hazard pay from deployments the government still won't fully acknowledge. He stepped through the front doors of Summit Ridge National Bank like anyone else would, steady, calm, hat in hand. That hat, a black cap stitched with gold thread reading Korea/Vietnam veteran, had been brushed clean before he left home. His shirt was pressed, though the cuffs were fraying, and in his coat pocket was a folded VA card, 2 tattered discharge papers, and a brass challenge coin worn soft around the edges. He stood in line patiently, quietly, the way men from his era often do, like waiting your turn is still sacred. But the moment he reached the counter, everything shifted. The teller, maybe mid-20s, blinked at the name on the account and raised an eyebrow, clearly uncertain. Bobby offered his ID with a slight tremor in his hands, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the lingering damage of time and a few too many cold nights in places with no names. "I'm just trying to pull some funds," he said politely. "This account's under Robert Keene. Been a while." The teller gave a tight smile and typed, then paused. Something on the screen didn't match what she expected. She flagged her manager. His name was Caden. Slick haircut, tie too short. The kind of smirk that doesn't need words to insult you. He stepped up, looked at Bobby's documents, then at Bobby himself, and let out a chuckle that wasn't friendly. "You sure this account's yours, sir?" he asked, drawing out "sir" like it was a joke. "This discharge form looks like it was typed on a dinosaur." The teller laughed nervously. Bobby said nothing. He just reached into his coat and placed something on the counter with slow, careful fingers, a brass challenge coin engraved with a thunderbird and 7 stars. Something no civilian would recognize, but any real soldier would stop breathing over. Kidden didn't even look at it. "Cute trinket," he muttered. "Anybody can buy those online these days." He turned to security and motioned toward the door. "I think we've got another wannabe vet trying to game the system. Escort him out, please." The guard hesitated, just a second, but enough for Bobby to hear every word, and for the rest of the bank to take notice. A few customers chuckled behind their phones. 1 or 2 pretended not to hear. Bobby didn't argue. He didn't demand anything. He simply picked up the coin, slid it gently back into his coat pocket, nodded once, and walked slowly to a bench by the window. There he sat, upright, hands folded, eyes on nothing in particular. The laughter quieted, and a strange silence settled over the bank lobby. Not guilt, not yet, but something colder, discomfort, as if deep down, people weren't so sure anymore. One person, though, didn't laugh. Her name was Maya Rodriguez, early 30s, former Air Force logistics specialist, now working in defense contracting. She'd seen a coin like that once, when a retired JSOC colonel had come to brief her team. And she remembered the way every officer in the room had stood when he placed it on the table. She walked up to the counter, locked eyes with the manager, and said, "You just made a mistake." Caden blinked. "Excuse me." Maya pointed at the bench. "That man isn't a fake. That coin alone outranks every paycheck in this building." Caden snorted. "If he's so important, why isn't someone here with him?" Maya didn't reply. She just stepped outside and made a call. But someone else had already noticed. In the back office, an older employee, one of those quiet lifers with no title but all the knowledge, had overheard the name Robert Keene. He paused, then walked slowly to the corner of the room where a brass plaque hung on the wall. It had been there since the bank opened, dedicated to Summit Ridge Command Base and to those who built it. Among the engraved names was one that hadn't faded, R.J. Keene. The man who had overseen the original military infrastructure before the land was converted to civilian use. The same man now being accused of faking a service record in the very bank that existed because of his command. The employee didn't speak. He picked up the phone, dialed a number that only a handful of people knew by heart, and said just 6 words. "It's Bishop Coyne. Summit Ridge. He's here." Then he hung up. Outside, Bobby sat still as stone. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't make a fuss. He just watched the wind tug at the flag across the street and waited. Not for justice, not for praise, but because that's what men like him have always done. They wait until they're needed. They wait even when no one believes them. They wait while the world laughs. But what no one in that bank knew, not the manager, not the teller, not even Maya, was that 30 minutes from now, that laughter would turn to silence. Because down the road, a furious general had already slammed his phone onto a desk, thrown on his dress uniform, and was on his way to make sure that the man everyone dismissed, the man they called a fake, would never be overlooked again. The next 20 minutes inside Summit Ridge National Bank passed like molasses, slow, thick, uncomfortable, especially for those who'd been laughing just moments ago. The teller who had snickered now kept her head low, pretending to type, while Caden, the manager, paced behind the counter, throwing the occasional glance at the front doors, clearly agitated, though he didn't yet know why. Bobby Keene hadn't moved. He sat exactly where he'd been told to sit, as if this were just another waiting room in another government building, just another day in a long life of lines and cold stares. His hands rested on his cane, his shoulders straight despite the ache he didn't talk about, and that challenge coin, remained tucked away, its presence as invisible to these people as his service. But the silence around him was different now. It wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore. It was the silence of doubt. Maya Rodriguez watched him from across the lobby, arms crossed tight, lips pressed in frustration. She'd made her call already, to a retired command contact at Fort Brixton who only needed to hear Bishop Coyne and Robert Keene before his tone changed completely. "You say he's there now?" the voice had asked. "Don't let him leave." Maya didn't know what would happen next, but her gut told her something was already in motion. She was right. 2 blocks away, a black SUV cut across traffic, lights flashing only once to signal authority without invitation. Inside sat Major General Everett Kane, decorated, feared, and famously precise. Currently the head of regional operations for 4 military districts, and one of only 5 men alive authorized to carry bishop-level active recon clearance. When he received the call and heard the name, Robert Keene, he stopped mid-briefing, stood from his chair, and said only 4 words to his aide. "Suit up. We're leaving." Keene wasn't just a name in a file to Kane. He was the reason Kane wore stars on his shoulders. A living ghost, a man thought long out of circulation, the type of figure whispered about in strategic meetings and legacy briefings. Kane had trained under Doctrine Keene helped write. The fact that he'd been insulted, publicly, in uniform, in a building literally sitting on land he once commanded, ignited something the general rarely let show: fury. Meanwhile, back at the bank, Bobby adjusted the sleeve of his coat. The quiet buzz of fluorescent lights overhead filled the air, but no one was speaking. A customer near the coffee station awkwardly left without making his deposit. A security guard stood near the exit, shifting nervously, casting sideways glances at the old man who hadn't made a single threat, raised his voice once, or even looked angry, but still seemed to radiate the kind of presence that unsettled people use to authority. Caden tried to brush off the discomfort. "He's still here," he muttered, peeking over the teller line. "Seriously?" He turned to one of the newer employees and snorted. "He's probably hoping someone posts about it so he can get a pity donation online. Veterans pull that stuff all the time." Maya's jaw clenched, and the young woman at the teller window lowered her gaze. Even she knew this had gone too far. Caden leaned back on the counter like he was proud of himself. "I should have called the cops." He laughed. Matter of time before he causes a scene. But just as the words left his mouth, the bank's glass doors swung open hard. The kind of open you don't ignore. Not a gust, not a customer, but a command. A chill sliced through the room. Boots, real boots, hit the tile with precision. Not rushed, not hesitant, deliberate. And walked Major General Everett Kane, full dress uniform, every ribbon gleaming, every line of fabric pressed razor sharp, a presence that filled the entire lobby before he even spoke. Behind him, an aide followed, briefcase in one hand, solemn and silent. No one moved. The noise died instantly. Teller phones were hung up. Coffee was left mid-pour. And Caden, still leaning on the counter, looked up, then froze. His smirk collapsed into silence. Kane didn't acknowledge anyone at first. His eyes locked directly onto the bench by the window where Bobby Keene still sat. And then, in front of the entire bank, the general snapped to attention and saluted. The sound of that gesture, the crack of palm against temple, rang louder than any apology ever could. Bobby looked up, confused for only a moment, before slowly rising, returning the salute with the dignity of someone who hadn't been saluted in years but never once forgot how. Then Kane turned, slowly, and scanned the room like a blade. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Who here called Colonel Robert Keene a fraud?" he asked, every syllable carved from steel. No one answered. Not at first. Kane stepped forward. "Colonel Keene," he said again, emphasizing the rank with chilling clarity, was instrumental in establishing joint force recon protocols still used in free nations. His record spans 2 wars, 6 theaters, and 14 unacknowledged operations. You questioned his identity. Eyes turned to Caden. The manager looked like he might be sick. I didn't know," he stammered. "His papers were old, and, of course they're old," Kane snapped. "Because he's earned his age. He fought for this country while your biggest challenge was learning how to schedule tweets." The silence in the room shifted again, from awkwardness to shame. Kane's aide stepped forward and opened the briefcase. Inside, a thick folder marked classified, a commemorative coin inset in velvet, and a printed scan of the very plaque on the bank wall with Robert Keene's name engraved in bold. Kane placed the folder on the counter. "This bank exists because of his strategic design. That account you flagged as suspicious? It funded the original supply lines you now profit from." He turned back to Bobby, softer now. "Sir, I'm sorry I didn't know you were in town sooner." Bobby gave a tired nod. "Didn't come to be found. Just needed enough to help my grandson with school." Kane nodded slowly. "Then let's make that happen." And together, they stepped toward the counter as Caden backed away, hands raised in silence, the laughter long gone, and the lesson just beginning. The silence inside Summit Ridge National Bank was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Every person in that room had just witnessed something shift, like the ground itself remembering the weight it once held. General Everett Kane stood beside Colonel Robert Keene at the counter, not barking orders, not calling for punishment, but simply standing as if nothing else in the world mattered until this man got what he came for. Bobby withdrew the funds quietly, without ceremony, to help his grandson pay for college, something he hadn't even mentioned until the general asked. He didn't want attention. He never had. All he ever wanted was to keep his word, to those he fought for, and to those he came home to. The teller's hand shook as she printed the receipt, whispering an apology that Bobby didn't acknowledge. Not out of spite, he just didn't need it. He took the slip, folded it once, and tucked it into his pocket like it was just another task done. But as he turned to leave, General Kane stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, you've got 5 minutes," he said. Bobby raised a brow. "For what?" Kane nodded toward the room. "For the honor you never asked for." And then, without a single word of command, every military veteran in the room, from a young reservist by the ATM to an old Navy corpsman filling out a deposit slip, stood tall and saluted. Even civilians rose from their seats. Not because they were told to, but because something in the air told them this is how you honor a man like that. Bobby froze for a second, not in pride, but in disbelief. Then he slowly returned the salute with quiet precision. Kane reached into his coat pocket and handed Bobby a small velvet box. "We've been holding this for years," he said. "Thought you'd want to have it now." Inside was a metal, clean and polished, engraved only with a name and 3 words. "Service beyond record." Bobby stared at it a long time. No tears, no speech. Just a slow nod, like he'd finally closed a door no one else had known was still open. Then he looked at Kane and said softly, "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came to keep a promise." Kane nodded back. "And in doing so, you reminded us all what service really means." Bobby walked out into the sunlight then. No cameras followed. No headlines came. But the people inside stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer. Later that week, a new line was added to the plaque by the bank's front entrance. Beneath the original dedication, a second inscription appeared: Robert J. Keene, Colonel, U.S. Army, honor in silence. It didn't name the incident. It didn't mention the general. But everyone who worked there knew. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to change everything. And now, every time a customer walks through those doors, they see the name of the man they almost laughed out of the building. The man who said nothing until a furious general walked in.